The phone buzzed insistently in my pocket, jolting me out of my focus. I wiped the sweat from my brow and stepped outside the makeshift clinic, where the harsh midday sun cast long shadows across the dusty paths of the rural village. The name flashing on my screen made my stomach drop. Victor. For a moment, I considered letting the call go unanswered. After years of dealing with my stepfather's antics, I knew that calls from him rarely brought anything good. Still, curiosity, and a faint, foolish hope, won. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Ariana." Victor's voice was cheerful. Far too cheerful. "Just thought you'd want to know, I've sold the mountain cabin." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "You did what?" "Sold it," he repeated casually, as if he were talking about an old sofa. "Don't look so shocked. It was for the greater good. Mine, obviously." He let out a smug laugh that sent heat rushing through my chest. "My name is Ariana, and for as long as I can remember, Victor has been the thorn in my side. My mother married him when I was 15. He arrived wrapped in charm and good humor, quick smiles and easy jokes. But beneath that polished exterior was a man who never hesitated to put his own needs first. The cabin wasn't just a vacation home. It was my sanctuary. Tucked away in the mountains, it was where I went to breathe after exhausting work trips, where I hosted friends for quiet weekends, where the world felt manageable again. Hearing Victor talk about it like it was just another pawn in his endless schemes made my hands shake. "You had no right," I said, my voice trembling. "That cabin wasn't yours to sell." "Relax," he drawled. "I've been managing things around here while you're off saving the world. Besides, what's the point of holding onto something you're never around to enjoy? It cleared my debts. You'll thank me later." "I'll thank you when hell freezes over," I snapped, ending the call before he could say another word. I paced back and forth, my heart racing. Victor's audacity knew no bounds, but this time he had crossed a line. What he didn't know, what I intended to keep to myself for now, was that the cabin wasn't entirely his to touch. My best friend Maya was co-owner. Years ago, we had drawn up a legal agreement that clearly required both our signatures for any sale. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I sat on the edge of my cot, staring at my phone as if it might burst into flames. My mind replayed Victor's smug tone again and again. How could he think this was acceptable? Selling something so deeply personal to me, as if it were a trinket he could trade for his own benefit. The cabin wasn't just mine. It was a lifeline. I spent summers there as a child, chasing fireflies and hiking with my mother before she remarried. After she passed, it became my anchor, the one constant when everything else felt like it was falling apart. To Victor, though, it was nothing more than another resource to exploit. I tapped Maya's name in my contacts. "Hey, Ari," she answered cheerfully. "What's up?" "Victor sold the cabin," I blurted out. There was a long pause. "He what?" "Apparently he needed money to cover gambling debts," I said bitterly. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants, but our co-ownership agreement makes that impossible. He doesn't have the authority to sell without you." Maya let out a low whistle. "He really thought he could get away with that. That man has no shame." "None," I agreed. "I'll finish my volunteer assignment and head home as soon as I can. Can you pull up the legal documents? I want to be ready when I get back." "You got it," she said firmly. "We'll handle this together." When I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. Victor thought I was too far away to fight back. He still saw me as the scared teenager he once steamrolled. He was wrong. I wasn't that girl anymore. The next few days passed in a blur as I wrapped up my work, but no matter how busy I stayed, Victor's betrayal followed me like a shadow. One evening, I opened my journal, memories spilling out, the the first time I restored the cabin with Maya, the quiet nights by the fireplace, the peace it gave me. This wasn't just a building. It was part of who I was. And Victor thought he could sell it like a poker chip. Not this time. The final days of my volunteer assignment felt heavier than the weeks before. Even as I moved through my responsibilities, checking supplies, consulting with patients, coordinating with local staff, my thoughts kept drifting back to the cabin and Victor's betrayal. Every spare moment, my mind replayed his smug voice, the casual way he'd announced selling something that had never truly been his. At night, sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of the cabin standing empty, its windows dark, the door hanging open to strangers. Each time I woke, my chest tight with anger and determination. Maya called the next evening, her tone brisk and focused. I went through the co-ownership agreement, she said. You were right. Victor had absolutely no authority to sell without my written consent. The sale is invalid. Relief washed through me, but it didn't last long. Do we know who he sold it to? I asked. Not yet, Maya replied. I checked the county records. There's no official transfer filed. It looks like he may have tried to do this under the table. That sounded exactly like Victor. Always cutting corners. Always assuming he could outsmart everyone else. What do you think our next step should be? I asked. We have options, she said. We can confront him directly, or we can let the legal process do the talking. Either way, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. I exhaled slowly. Thank you, Maya. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, she said warmly. But you don't have to do this alone. That night, I sat on my cot staring at the ceiling, a plan slowly forming. Victor expected anger. He expected shouting, tears, guilt. That's how he always maintained control, by pushing people until they reacted. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I would give him something he never anticipated: calm, preparation, and consequences. 2 days later, I boarded the long flight home. As the plane lifted off, I felt a strange sense of resolve settle in my bones. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about every boundary Victor had crossed over the years, every moment I'd swallowed my anger to keep the peace. When I finally arrived home, the silence hit me first. The house felt untouched but hollow, plants slightly wilted, mail piled near the door, the fridge nearly empty. I dropped my bags and stood still for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle. Before I could even unpack, my phone buzzed. Victor. I stared at the screen, debating. Then I answered. Well, he said, his voice dripping with fake warmth. If it isn't my globe-trotting stepdaughter. Back to reality already. What do you want, Victor? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Just checking in, he said smugly. Making sure you're not too upset about the whole cabin thing. I mean, it's gone now. No use crying over spilled milk. I clenched my jaw. Funny you should say that, I replied evenly. Because as far as I can tell, it's not gone. Maya and I checked the ownership records. The sale didn't go through. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you. There was a pause, brief, but telling. That's ridiculous, he snapped. The buyer paid in cash. The paperwork's handled. It's a done deal. No, it's not, I said calmly. Maya and I co-own the cabin. Without her consent, the sale is legally invalid. It's still ours. His laugh came out sharp and brittle. You always think you're so smart, don't you? Playing the perfect daughter. You have no idea how hard I've had it. I did what I had to do. You stole from me, I said. And you expect sympathy. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. 4 years, Victor had relied on intimidation and guilt. This time, I'd met him head-on. The next morning, I spread Maya's documents across the kitchen table. The agreement was crystal clear. Victor's actions weren't just unethical, they were illegal. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the door, Victor stood there, already stepping inside as if he still had the right. "Mind if I come in?" he said, not waiting for an answer. I folded my arms as he dropped into a chair. "Look, Ariana," he began, his tone condescending. "I know you're upset, but you have to understand. I was desperate. The people I owed money to weren't patient. And stealing my property was your solution." I asked. "Borrowing," he corrected quickly. "I was going to pay you back." I let out a bitter laugh. "Your luck hasn't worked in decades, Victor. Why would this time be any different?" His confidence wavered, then hardened. "You're overreacting. It's just a cabin." "It's my home," I snapped. "You don't get to decide what I value." His face darkened. "You wouldn't really go to the authorities, would you?" I met his gaze. "Try me." For the first time, Victor had no response. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. My heart pounded, but beneath the nerves was something new. Power. I called Maya immediately. He showed up, I told her. Tried to spin a sob story. She snorted. Borrowed the cabin. That's rich. I told him I'd go to the authorities if he pushed further. Good, she said firmly. I've already contacted a lawyer. We'll draft a formal cease and desist letter. If he tries anything else, we'll have a paper trail. As I hung up, I realized something important. Victor thought this was a game. But I was done playing. The cease and desist letter went out the very next morning. Maya forwarded me a copy before it was sent, and I read every line carefully. The language was firm, professional, and impossible to twist, something Victor had always relied on. It clearly stated that any attempt to claim ownership, contact the buyer, or interfere with the cabin would result in immediate legal action. I imagined Victor opening the envelope, his smug confidence slowly cracking, as he realized this situation wasn't going to bend to his will. For a brief moment, things went quiet. No calls. No texts. No surprise visits. The silence should have been comforting, but with Victor, silence usually meant planning. I kept myself busy. I organized documents, saved screenshots of every message he'd ever sent about the cabin, and backed everything up in multiple places. Years of dealing with him had taught me one thing: preparation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. 3 days later, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "This is Detective Harris," the voice said calmly when I answered. "I'm calling regarding a property dispute involving a mountain cabin." "Are you Ariana Daniels?" "Yes," I replied, my pulse quickening. "I am. I've reviewed the information your co-owner, Maya Brooks, provided. Based on what we've seen so far, the sale appears unauthorized. We'd like to ask you a few questions, if you're willing." "I am," I said without hesitation. The conversation lasted nearly half an hour. I explained the co-ownership agreement, Victor's history of manipulation, and the call where he openly admitted to selling the cabin. Detective Harris listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification. At this point, he said finally, "We are going to contact the buyer and the real estate agent involved. If Mr. Hale knowingly misrepresented ownership, this could escalate into fraud." I thanked him and hung up, my hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of inevitability. Victor had always believed consequences were for other people. That belief was about to collapse. That evening, Victor called. His voice was sharper than before, stripped of its casual arrogance. "What did you do?" he demanded. I protected what's mine, I replied calmly. You went to the police, he snapped. You're trying to ruin me. You ruined yourself, I said. I gave you a chance to stop. He scoffed, but there was panic underneath. You think the law's on your side? I raised you. I kept a roof over your head. You exploited my patience, I said evenly. And you mistook it for weakness. There was a long pause. Then he lowered his voice. We can fix this. I'll talk to the buyer. We'll reverse it quietly. It's too late for quiet, I said. You crossed a line. He hung up without another word. The next day, Maya called with an update. I spoke to the real estate agent, she said. She admitted Victor signed everything alone. She also said the buyer hasn't completed payment. She flagged the transaction as suspicious. That's good, I said, relief seeping in. Better than good, Maya replied. It gives us leverage. By the end of the week, Detective Harris confirmed the buyer had agreed to halt the transaction. They'd been unaware of the co-ownership and were cooperating fully. The sale was officially frozen. Victor, however, wasn't done. My mother called that night. Ariana, she began softly, already defensive. You didn't have to take it this far. You know how Victor gets. Yes, I said quietly. That's why I did. She sighed. He's under a lot of pressure. So was I replied. 4 years. There was nothing else to say. When the call ended, I felt a strange calm. For the first time, I wasn't trying to explain myself. I didn't need permission anymore. 2 days later, Detective Harris called again. We are moving forward, he said. Based on the evidence, we are pursuing charges for fraudulent misrepresentation. Mr. Hale will be required to appear in court. I closed my eyes, absorbing the moment. Thank you, I said. For taking this seriously. You did the right thing, he replied. That's not easy when family is involved. After the call, I drove up to the cabin. The road twisted through the trees, familiar and grounding. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent of wood and pine wrapped around me like a memory. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Safe? I sat by the fireplace, letting the silence settle. 4 years, this place had been my refuge. Now, it felt like a symbol of something more, proof that I could protect what mattered, even when it meant standing alone. That night, as the fire crackled softly, my phone buzzed one last time. A text from Victor. You didn't have to destroy me. I stared at the words for a long moment before replying. I didn't destroy you. I stopped letting you destroy me. I turned the phone face down and let the quiet return. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't bracing for what came next. I was ready for it. Court day arrived faster than I expected. I didn't feel nervous walking into the courthouse, just focused. That surprised me. A year ago, the idea of facing Victor in a legal setting would have twisted my stomach into knots. But something had shifted. I wasn't here to defend myself anymore. I was here to tell the truth. Maya met me outside the building, a file tucked under her arm. You ready? She asked. I nodded. More than I thought I'd be. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Victor was already there, seated with a lawyer who looked exhausted, like a man regretting the case he'd agreed to take. Victor avoided my eyes at first, then glanced up with a glare that used to scare me. It didn't work anymore. When the hearing began, Detective Harris laid out the facts cleanly and methodically. The co-ownership agreement. The lack of consent. The attempted sale. The signed documents. The buyer's testimony. Each piece fell into place like bricks in a wall Victor could no longer climb over. Victor's lawyer tried to argue desperation. My client was under extreme financial stress, he said. He believed he had implied authority within the family. The judge cut him off. Implied authority does not override written law, she said flatly. Especially not in real estate. Victor shifted in his seat. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood, hands steady, and told the court exactly what the cabin meant to me. Not dramatically, just honestly. I explained how it was co-owned, how it had been restored with care, and how Victor never once asked before selling it. He didn't make a mistake, I said. He made a choice. One he assumed I wouldn't challenge. The judge nodded slightly. Victor was finally called to testify. That's when everything unraveled. He contradicted himself twice within 5 minutes, claiming I'd given verbal permission, then admitting he never actually asked. When pressed about the documents, he muttered that he hadn't read them carefully. The courtroom went quiet. You signed legal paperwork without reading it, the judge asked. Victor shrugged weakly. I trusted the situation. No, the judge replied coolly. You exploited it. That was the moment I knew this was over. The ruling was swift. The sale was declared null and void. The cabin remained under my and Maya's ownership. Victor was formally charged with fraudulent misrepresentation and ordered to repay legal and administrative costs associated with the attempted sale. But the judge wasn't finished. Mr. Hale, she said, this court strongly advises you to cease all contact regarding this property. Any further interference will result in additional charges. Victor didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, the arrogance finally stripped away. Outside the courtroom, Maya hugged me tightly. You did it, she said. You really did. I exhaled, feeling lighter than I had in years. We did. Victor didn't approach me. He walked past without a word, shoulders slumped, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something like sadness, not for him, but for the years I'd spent shrinking myself to survive him. That version of me was gone now. A week later, I returned to the cabin for the first time since the ruling. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dust motes floating lazily in the air. I opened every window, letting the fresh mountain breeze fill the rooms. I cleaned slowly, deliberately, like I was reclaiming each space. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time, the cabin didn't just feel like a refuge. It felt like a victory. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. I heard about the ruling. I wish things didn't have to end like this. I stared at the screen before replying. I wish they didn't start like this. She didn't respond. And for once, that was okay. Over the next few days, news traveled fast. Friends reached out. Some relatives stayed silent. I didn't chase explanations or apologies. I didn't need validation anymore. What surprised me most was how peaceful life became once I stopped managing other people's emotions. I slept better. I laughed more. And every time I looked around the cabin, I felt proud, not just because I'd protected it, but because I'd finally protected myself. Victor tried once more to call me. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. This didn't have to be war. I deleted it without replying. Because the truth was simple, it wasn't a war. It was a boundary. And I had finally learned how to hold it. The quiet that followed the court ruling felt unfamiliar. For years, chaos had been the background noise of my life, Victor's moods, his crises, his endless ability to turn every situation into an emergency I was somehow responsible for fixing. Now, without him intruding, the silence felt almost too loud. At first, I didn't trust it. I woke early every morning at the cabin, half expecting my phone to light up with another problem, another accusation, another attempt to guilt me into submission. But the phone stayed silent. Days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, I began to breathe differently. I threw myself into restoring the cabin, not because it needed it, but because I did. Sanding old railings, repainting the porch, fixing the loose step near the back door. Each task grounded me. Every improvement felt like a quiet promise to myself, this is mine. I am safe here. Maya came up most weekends, usually armed with coffee and unsolicited advice. You know, she said one afternoon as we worked on the garden beds, most people would have backed down. Family pressure, guilt, all that. I wiped dirt from my hands. I almost did. But you didn't. I paused, realizing something in that moment. Because I finally understood that peace costs something. And I was tired of paying for it with myself. She smiled. That's growth. Not everyone saw it that way. Word reached me through distant relatives that Victor was telling his version of the story. In his retelling, I was cold. Ungrateful. Vindictive. A daughter who had turned on family for money. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. At first, the rumors stung. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be reasonable, understanding, good. Knowing that people still believed him made old insecurities resurface. But then I remembered something the judge had said, written truth outlasts emotional manipulation. And I let the rumors pass. One evening, I received an email from a woman I didn't recognize. Her message was hesitant but sincere. I don't know if you'll remember me. I'm Karen. I dated Victor years ago. I just wanted to say, thank you. Watching you stand up to him helped me realize I wasn't crazy either. I stared at the screen longer than I expected to. She wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, similar messages trickled in, quiet confessions from people who'd once been in Victor's orbit. Stories of manipulation, financial pressure, emotional control. Patterns I knew all too well. It hit me then, this had never been personal. Victor didn't target me because I was weak. He targeted me because I was capable, and he wanted access to that strength without earning it. That realization changed something fundamental inside me. I stopped questioning myself. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I could have been kinder, calmer, quieter. I stopped shrinking my voice to keep others comfortable. Instead, I focused on building a future that felt intentional. I expanded my volunteer work into something more structured, helping people, especially women, navigate property rights, co-ownership disputes, and boundary setting in family situations. I didn't advertise it loudly. I didn't need to. The right people found me. One afternoon, as I was organizing paperwork at the cabin table, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Her voice was tired. Older than I remembered. I wanted to ask how you're doing, she said. I'm doing well, I replied honestly. A pause. He's struggling, she said softly. Financially. Emotionally. I expected to feel guilt. I didn't. I'm sorry he's struggling, I said carefully. But I'm not responsible for fixing it. Another pause. Longer this time. I think, she said slowly, I forgot you were allowed to say that. So had I. We talked for a few more minutes, cautious, distant, but civil. When the call ended, I felt no heaviness. No urge to explain or justify. Just clarity. Victor never contacted me again. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard he was facing additional legal trouble unrelated to me, more debts, more shortcuts catching up to him. For the first time, his chaos no longer brushed against my life. And that was the greatest victory of all. One night, sitting by the fireplace, I pulled out an old photo album I'd found tucked away in a cabinet. Pictures of the cabin from years ago. Me, younger, smiling uncertainly. My mother, before everything fractured. Moments frozen in time. I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Because I could finally look at my past without living inside it. As the fire crackled softly, I realized something simple but profound. The cabin wasn't just a place I'd defended in court. It was the line I'd drawn in my life. And once drawn, nothing, not family, not fear, not history, was allowed to cross it again. Change rarely announces itself loudly. Most of the time, it slips in quietly, through routines that feel ordinary, through choices that no longer hurt to make. By the time I realized my life had truly shifted, the change was already complete. The cabin was no longer a refuge I escaped to. It was home. I registered it as my primary address, moved the last of my belongings from storage, and closed the chapter on the apartment that had once felt like a temporary holding place between disasters. The first night I slept there officially, the silence felt different, not tense, not fragile, but settled. For the first time in years, nothing was chasing me. My work grew steadily. What started as informal guidance turned into structured consultations. People came with stories painfully familiar, siblings exploiting shared property, parents using guilt as leverage, partners rewriting verbal promises to suit themselves. I never told them what to do. I taught them how to see clearly. Power, I'd say, isn't loud. It's quiet confidence backed by preparation. They listened. One morning, a letter arrived addressed in handwriting I recognized instantly. Victor. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the table and made coffee first. Watched the steam rise. Let myself feel grounded. Only then did I sit down and break the seal. The letter wasn't angry. That surprised me. It was rambling, defensive, wrapped in a thin layer of apology that never quite reached accountability. He wrote about pressure. About how things got out of hand. About how he never meant for it to go so far. Then came the real point. He wanted a meeting. No lawyers, he wrote. Just family. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Family. Once, that word would have pulled me in instantly. Once, I would have rushed to fix things, to smooth the damage, to carry responsibility that wasn't mine. Now, I saw it clearly. Family isn't a shield for bad behavior. It's not a pass for entitlement. And it's certainly not a weapon to regain access. I wrote back. Brief. Polite. Firm. I don't see a reason to meet. I wish you well, but my boundaries remain unchanged. I didn't explain further. I didn't owe him that. The response never came. Instead, something unexpected did. An invitation. A local community center reached out, asking if I'd be willing to speak at a small event about navigating shared assets and family conflict. My first instinct was to say no. Public attention still felt uncomfortable. But then I thought of all the people who'd written to me quietly. The ones who felt alone in situations no one talked about openly. So I said yes. The room was modest. Folding chairs. Coffee in paper cups. About 30 people, all different ages, all carrying versions of the same weight. I didn't tell my full story. I didn't need to. I talked about patterns. About red flags. About how manipulation often wears the face of obligation. About how love and access are not the same thing. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone started clapping. Afterward, people stayed behind. Asked questions. shared pieces of themselves in low voices. One woman took my hands and said, "I thought I was cruel for wanting peace." I squeezed her fingers gently. "You're not," I said. "You're human." That night, driving back to the cabin, I felt something new. Purpose, not born of pain, but of clarity. Victor faded further into the background. His name surfaced occasionally in second-hand conversations, always attached to another complication, another bridge burned. But it no longer stirred anything in me. No anger. No satisfaction. Just distance. My relationship with my mother evolved slowly. She began calling more often, not to ask favors, not to mediate, but to talk. Real conversations. Awkward at times, honest at others. One evening she said, "I didn't protect you the way I should have." It wasn't a grand apology. But it was real. "I know," I replied. And I've made peace with that. We were rebuilding, not the past, but something smaller, more realistic. Boundaried. Adult. Healthy. Late one autumn afternoon, I found myself standing at the edge of the property, watching the trees shift colors. Gold. Rust. Deep red. Seasons changing without asking permission. I thought about the person I'd been when all of this began. Tired. Afraid. Afraid that saying no would cost me everything. The truth was simpler, and kinder. Saying no had given me everything that mattered. Safety. Dignity. A future that belonged to me. As dusk settled in, I turned back toward the cabin, lights glowing warmly through the windows. Whatever storms waited beyond those trees, I knew one thing for certain now: I would never abandon myself again. The first snowfall always made the cabin feel like a different world. Everything slowed. Sound softened. Even memories seemed to move more gently. That winter, I spent more time reflecting, not on what I'd lost, but on what I'd learned. For most of my life, I believed love meant endurance. That if I stayed long enough, gave enough, forgave enough, things would eventually balance out. They never did. What changed wasn't my circumstances, it was my understanding. I learned that love without respect becomes obligation. That family without accountability becomes control. And that peace isn't something you're given, it's something you choose. The project I'd started evolved into a non-profit by spring. We focused on education, helping people recognize manipulation before it cost them years of their lives. We held workshops, published guides, and built a quiet network of support. I never positioned myself as a hero. Just someone who had walked through the fire and came back with a map. One afternoon, a young woman stayed behind after a session. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "My parents say I owe them everything," she said. "That if I leave, I'm selfish." I looked at her and saw my younger self. "You owe yourself a life," I said gently. "And you're allowed to build it." She cried. So did I, later, alone. Not out of sadness. Out of release. News of Victor's passing came a year later. Simple. Quiet. No drama. I attended the service briefly, standing at the back. I felt no anger. No triumph. Just a calm acceptance of what had been and what would never be. Some people expected me to say more. I didn't. Closure isn't always a speech. Sometimes it's silence. Afterward, I returned to the cabin and opened the windows, letting fresh air move through the rooms. I pulled out the old documents one last time, the deeds, the letters, the proof of everything I'd survived. Then I put them away. They no longer defined me. That night, sitting on the porch, I watched the stars scatter across the sky. I thought about the girl who once drove 4 hours home only to find her life packed into garbage bags. She thought she had lost everything. She was wrong. She had found herself. I took out a notebook and wrote a single sentence on the first page: boundaries are not walls. They are doors, with locks I control. The cabin stood quietly behind me, solid, warm, unmovable. Not because it was defended in court, but because it was defended in spirit. My life was no longer shaped by fear of abandonment, or the need for approval. It was shaped by intention, by choice, by self-respect. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance. Not land. Not money. Not validation. Freedom.